The fence line along the eastern pasture had been failing for 2 seasons, and Stellan Holt knew it the way a man knows most things that are slipping away from him. Not all at once, but in small surrenders, one rotted post at a time. He worked the morning the way he worked every morning, which was to say quietly and without complaint, driving a new post into ground that was still half frozen from the long Montana winter. The mallet rose and fell. The post sank. Behind him, the Holt place stood the way it had always stood, 2 stories of rough-hewn timber and riverstone, built by his father's hands, in a time when the territory still felt like it belonged to the people willing to work it. The mountains to the west held the last of the snow. The sky above them was the particular shade of pale blue that came only in April, when the cold had not yet broken. But the light had already changed its mind about the season. Stellan worked without looking up. He had learned long ago that the mountains would still be there when he was finished. He was on the 7th post when he heard Wren running. She ran the way she did everything, with complete commitment and no apparent awareness that the world might have edges. 8 years old, small for her age, with her mother's dark hair and her mother's habit of leading with her chin when she had news. She came around the corner of the barn at full speed and stopped 3 feet from him with the precision of a child who had learned exactly how close she could get before her father would tell her to be careful. "There's a letter," she said. Stellan drove the mallet down once more. There are always letters. Most of them are from the bank. "This one's from Denver." He stopped. Wren held the envelope out with both hands, the way she offered things she considered important. The envelope was cream-colored good paper, addressed in a woman's handwriting to Mr. S. Holt, Birch Creek, Montana Territory. The return address was a newspaper office in Denver, Colorado. Stellan looked at it for a long moment without taking it. "Did you," he said carefully, "send a letter to Denver?" Wren's chin came up a fraction of an inch. "I sent several," she said. He read the letter at the kitchen table while Wren stood in the doorway and watched him with the careful attention of someone who has done something they cannot undo and is trying to determine how bad the damage will be. The letter was short. Shorter than he expected for a woman who had traveled apparently some considerable distance in her mind to consider this particular arrangement. It said that her name was Cordelia Voss, that she was a widow of 38 years, that she had been residing in Boston until recently, and that she wrote, accustomed to hard work, though perhaps not the variety common to Montana. She added that she understood this was an unusual letter to write and an unusual thing to consider, and that she would understand completely if he did not reply. She had already replied to herself. There was a second page, which was her train itinerary. Stellan set both pages on the table and looked at his daughter. "You told her to come," he said. "I told her she was welcome to visit." "There's a difference. What did you tell her about me?" Wren considered this with the honesty of a child who has not yet learned that honesty sometimes requires editing. "I told her you were good at fixing things, and that you had nice hands, and that you were sad most of the time, but not the kind of sad that makes a person mean." The kitchen was very quiet. "She replied to that," Stellan said. "She replied to all 12 of them." He sent one letter back. He wrote it 3 times before he was satisfied that it said exactly what he needed it to say, which was not much. He told her his name, the state of the ranch. The fact that his daughter had acted without his knowledge and that if she chose to continue to Harlan Junction, he would not turn her away. He also told her that he had no intentions of the kind she might reasonably expect from such an arrangement, and that if she wished to return to Boston, he would cover the cost of the ticket. He did not tell her about Della. He did not tell her about the debt. He did not tell her that the eastern fence had been failing for 2 seasons, and that the bank had sent 2 men out in February to walk the perimeter of the property with paper and pencils, writing things down in the particular way that men write things down when they are deciding what something is worth and whether it is worth taking. He mailed the letter and did not think about it again, or he tried not to. The trying was less successful than the not thinking. Wren woke him the morning the train was due. She had dressed herself in her good dress, the blue one that had belonged to a girl in town whose mother sold it at the dry goods store for 50 cents. And she had braided her own hair with the particular lopsided results that came from 8 years of practice without instruction. She stood in his doorway with her arms at her sides and her chin up, and she looked so much like her mother in that moment that Stellan had to look at the wall for a second before he could look back at her. "She'll be on the 9 o'clock, Wren said. "I know. Are you going to go meet her? I'll be here when she arrives." Wren evaluated this. "That's not the same as going to meet her." "No," Stellan agreed. "It's not." He went to the fence line. There were still 3 posts to set on the eastern run, and the work would not wait because a woman was arriving on the 9 o'clock train. The cattle didn't care about the 9 o'clock train. The bank certainly didn't. He worked through the morning with the mallet and the cold ground, and he did not watch the road. He heard the wagon before he saw it, a hired rig from Harlan. The driver, a boy named Ellis, who supplemented his father's livery income by meeting trains. The wagon came up the road at a pace that suggested the passenger had asked to be delivered promptly. Stellan set down the mallet. He propped one boot on the lowest rail of the fence and watched her come. His first thought was that she was wrong for this place. He knew it the way you know weather before it arrives, not from a single thing, but from the accumulated weight of evidence. She sat in the wagon with her back straight in the way of a woman who had worn a corset since girlhood and had not entirely abandoned the habit even here. Her dress was a deep charcoal gray, traveled in practical by the standards of where she'd come from, which was still impractical by the standards of where she'd arrived. Her hair was dark brown with silver threads running through it, pinned up with the precision of someone who understood that precision was a form of armor. She was looking at the ranch the way people look at things they are deciding about. The wagon stopped. Ellis helped her down with the bag. She paid him, said something to him in a low voice that made him nod. And then she turned and looked at the fence line, at Stellan. He didn't move from his post. He was aware that this was not the warmest greeting a man could offer. He was also aware that warmth he did not feel was a thing he was not willing to manufacture. She picked up the bag. She walked toward him across the uneven ground with the careful steps of someone learning a new surface, and she did not look down at her feet. She looked at him. "Mr. Holt," she said when she was close enough that he could see her eyes, which were gray level and entirely unreadable. "Mrs. Voss, your daughter's letters were very thorough. I've been made aware of that." She looked at the fence, the half-driven post, the mallet. Then she looked back at him. I don't expect you to stop working on my account." He had not expected her to say that. He picked up the mallet. She set her bag down in the dust beside the fence and watched him work. Wren appeared from behind the barn at a pace that was not quite running, which meant she had been waiting and had decided that waiting was finished. She stopped 4 feet from the woman and looked at her with the same thorough assessment she gave everything she was deciding about. The woman looked back at her with exactly the same expression. "You're smaller than I pictured," Wren said. "You're precisely as I pictured," the woman said. Wren considered this. "What did you picture?" "Someone who writes 12 letters and includes a train schedule in the last one." A pause. Then Wren said, "Are you mad?" "No," the woman said. "I'm not." Wren turned to her father. He had stopped working. He was watching the two of them with an expression that Wren recognized as the one he wore when he didn't know what to do with something, which was an expression she did not see often. "She can have the room with the window," Wren said. "She can decide where she sleeps," Stellan said. "The room with the window would be fine," the woman said. "Thank you, Wren." Wren picked up the woman's bag before either adult could stop her. It was heavier than she expected, and she adjusted her grip and carried it toward the house without acknowledging the weight, which was exactly what her father would have done. There was a small box tied to the handle of the bag that Wren did not look inside. Not because she lacked curiosity, she had more curiosity than she knew what to do with, but because something in the way the woman had set the bag down made her understand that the box was not for touching. She noticed that the woman noticed her not touching it. The room with the window had been Della's sewing room. Stellan had stopped calling it that 2 years after Della died, when he understood that Wren had begun calling it the same thing. He called it, which was the room with the window, and that this was perhaps not an accident. He carried extra wood up for the stove, while the woman unpacked, which was not something he needed to do, because there was already sufficient wood. But it gave him a reason to be in the doorway without having to explain himself. She unpacked with economy: 2 dresses, a brush, several books, a leather satchel that she set on the desk and did not open, and the small box which she placed on the shelf above the bed with a particular care that made it look like something that had been placed on shelves before in other rooms and had not yet found the room it belonged to. "The water's cold in the mornings," he said. "There's a kettle on the stove. I'm used to cold water." He doubted that. He said nothing. "Mr. Holt." She turned from the shelf. "I want to say something before we go further with whatever this is." He waited. "I didn't come here for the reasons you might reasonably assume," she said. "I'm not without resources. I'm not looking for a man to solve my problems. I came because I needed to be somewhere that wasn't Boston, and because your daughter's letters were the most honest things I'd read in about 4 years. She paused. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel better about the situation. I'm telling you because I think you're a man who prefers to know where he stands." Stellan looked at her for a moment. "And where do you stand?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I thought 3 months might tell me." He nodded once. "Dinner's at 6. Wren does the breakfast dishes, but she spills." He left her to unpack. That night he cooked the lamb stew he made every Tuesday, and the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table in the particular arrangement of people who do not yet know each other's habits. Wren had moved her chair 2 inches closer to the woman than to her father, which Stellan noted without comment. The woman ate without complaint and without excessive compliment. She asked about the cattle not in the polite way people asked about things they didn't care about, but in the specific way of someone who had read something and was checking it against reality. She wanted to know about the grazing rotation, about the fencing situation on the eastern run, about what the winter had done to the stock. Stellan answered. He found somewhat against his expectations that there was more to say on these subjects than he usually said. Wren tells me there are 3 horses, she said. 4 now. Mare foaled in February. What did Wren name it? Stellan looked at his daughter. Argument, Wren said. The woman set down her fork. Then she picked it up again. But for a moment her face had done something that Stellan had not expected from a woman from Boston, which was that it had looked entirely real. After supper, Wren showed her the drawing she had made of the coyotes she had been watching in the north pasture. Then she showed her the rock collection. Then she showed her the book she had been reading, which was above her level, but which she had been working through for 3 months. With the determination she brought to everything, Stellan washed the dishes and listened to them through the kitchen doorway. He could not hear all of it. He heard enough to know that the woman was not performing interest. She was asking questions that built on each other the way a person asks questions when they are actually listening to the answers. Della had listened that way. He dried the last dish and stood at the window and looked out at the night pasture, where argument was a pale shape beside her mother in the dark. He found the woman on the porch after Wren had gone to bed. She was standing at the rail, not leaning against it, looking out at the valley the way people from flat lamp-lit cities sometimes look at dark open country, with a kind of disoriented wonder at the absence of the things they were accustomed to. The stars over Birch Creek in April were not polite. They took up the whole sky. There was no negotiating with them. He came out and stood beside her, not too close. He had no idea what the appropriate distance was for this situation, because there was no situation quite like this one to reference. It's quiet, she said, most nights. I'd forgotten quiet could be so loud. He understood what she meant. He didn't say that. He said, the foaling season keeps me up some nights. Argued with the mare for about 6 hours in February. She turned her head slightly. Who won? The foal. She almost smiled. He could see it in the way the corners of her eyes changed. She didn't let it become a full smile, but it had been there. They stood for a while. The valley below them was dark and still. Somewhere to the east, a coyote called once and went quiet. Why did you leave Boston? He said. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, she gave him the partial truth that he had expected, that her husband had died, that he had left complications, that she had needed distance from those complications. It was not a lie. It was also not the whole thing. He could tell the difference. He had been telling that kind of partial truth himself for 4 years, about how the ranch was fine, and how things would turn around, and how the debt was manageable. He didn't press her. What was he like? Stellan said. Your husband. The pause before she answered was a specific kind of pause. Capable, she said finally. He was very capable. Stellan thought about that word for a moment, the way she had chosen it, instead of other words. My father used to say there were two kinds of capable, he said. The kind that builds and the kind that acquires. She turned to look at him fully. In the dark, he couldn't read her expression clearly, but something in her posture had changed. Which kind was your father? She asked. The building kind. It didn't make him rich. No, she said quietly. It usually doesn't. She went inside shortly after. He stayed on the porch for another hour, watching the stars move over the valley, the way they had moved over this valley every night since before his father's father had set foot on the territory, and the way they would move long after Stellan Holt had finished with his fence posts and his debts and his Tuesday lamb stew and all the rest of it. 3 days passed in the ordinary work of the ranch. She did not try to help with the cattle, which was sensible. She did not pretend to know things she didn't know which he appreciated. She learned the kitchen stove on the second morning he heard her fighting with the flue damper from the barn and said nothing. She figured it out. She left the damper at the right setting for the rest of the week. On the third day, she asked if she could look at the account books. He almost said no. He said yes instead, because the alternative was to pretend the books weren't what they were. And he was tired of pretending the books weren't what they were. She sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours with the ledgers and the invoices and the bank letters making small marks on a page she'd brought from her room. When she was done, she looked up. "You've paid this invoice twice," she said. She pointed to a supply order from the hardware merchant in Harlan. Stellan looked at it. He had been looking at these books for 6 years and had not caught it. "There are 2 others," she said. "Smaller amounts. The same vendor." He sat down across from her and she showed him. The total was not a fortune, but it was a month's feed. It was the difference between one kind of worried and another. He looked at her for a moment. "How did you know where to look?" She was quiet a second before she answered. "I spent 14 years watching someone run companies," she said. "You learn where things go wrong." She closed the ledger and slid it back across the table. He took it. He didn't ask anything else, and neither did she. But he noticed that she put the page of her own notes in her pocket, rather than leaving it on the table the way a person protects something they have not finished with yet. On the 4th day, Silas Pruitt came. He arrived in the early afternoon in a good buggy with a Meridian Cattle Company stamp on the side panel, which was the company's way of reminding you, even before Pruitt opened his mouth, who he represented and what that representation implied. Pruitt was 55, lean and weathered, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something harder. He wore a decent suit for a man who spent his days riding territory roads, and he held his hat in his hands, with the practiced deference of someone who had learned that deference was a tool. Stellan met him in the yard. He had met Pruitt twice before. The meetings had been the same, both times cordial, clear, and entirely without ambiguity about what Pruitt was there to accomplish. Meridian wanted the eastern 200 acres. The eastern 200 acres included the water access and the fence line along Birch Creek, which meant that without them, the ranch was not a ranch in any functional sense, but a house on dry ground. "Mr. Holt," Pruitt said. "Mr. Pruitt, I was hoping to have a word before the season gets away from us." They had the word. It was the same word they'd had before, arranged in slightly different order. Meridian's offer was fair by the measure of men who defined fairness as whatever they were willing to pay. The note on the property was coming due. The bank, as Pruitt delicately did not quite say, had already been in conversation with Meridian about various contingencies. Stellan listened to all of it. When Pruitt finished, he said, "Same answer as last time." Pruitt nodded the way men nod when they have expected this and have planned for it. He turned to go. Then he stopped. He was looking past Stellan's shoulder. Stellan turned. Cordelia had come out of the house to call him for the midday meal. She stood on the porch steps with her hand raised slightly, the way you raise your hand when you realize you have interrupted something. She had her hair down from the morning's arrangement, and she was wearing the gray dress. Pruitt looked at her for 3 full seconds. Something happened in his face, not surprise exactly, but recognition. The particular stillness of a man who has encountered information he did not expect and is deciding what to do with it. "Ma'am," he said. "Mr." She started. "Pruitt. Silas Pruitt. Meridian Cattle." He looked at Stellan. "Your wife." "Guessed," Stellan said. Pruitt nodded slowly. He put his hat on. He looked at Cordelia once more, the same measured look. And then he walked to his buggy and left. Stellan watched him go. "Do you know that man?" he said when the buggy was down the road. A pause. Half a breath. "No," she said. "I don't think so." He turned back to her. Her face was composed. Her hands were still. Everything about her was calm, in the deliberate way that things are calm when they are working at it. He went inside for dinner. That night, after Wren was asleep, Cordelia sat alone at the desk in the room with the window. She did not light a second lamp. The one lamp was enough for what she was doing, which was opening the small box. The letters inside were bound with a ribbon that had once been blue and had gone gray with handling. There were 11 of them on paper that had aged to the color of old cream. They were addressed in various hands to Voss and Western Railway, Eastern Office, Boston, Massachusetts, and the replies or the lack of replies had been shuffled in among them like the pages of a story told badly. She had read them all before. She read them again anyway in the order she always read them, which was not the order they were written, but the order in which she had found them one by one over 6 weeks of going through Aldous' papers after he died, each one a small stone being added to a weight she had not yet named. She read until she found the one she had been looking for, without admitting she was looking for it. It was dated 1876. The handwriting was careful and a little formal. The handwriting of a man who had learned to write in a schoolhouse and still respected the act of it. The paper had the letterhead of a law office in Helena, Montana territory. "Dear Sirs," it began, "I write on behalf of my father, Edric Holt of Birch Creek, Montana territory, regarding the contract of April 14th, 1876, between my father and your company representative, a Mr. Caldwell." She stopped reading. She knew what the letter said. She had read it 4 times. She sat in the lamplight and looked at the name. Holt. The mountains to the west were invisible in the dark, but she knew they were there. She could feel the weight of them the way you feel the presence of something large and very still. Below her, somewhere in the dark of the house, a man named Stellan Holt was sleeping in a bed in a home his father had built on land that his father had worked and borrowed against and ultimately been broken by. And the company that had broken him had belonged to her husband. And she had known. Not the specifics, not this name, not Birch Creek, but the practice, the contracts with the favorable terms spoken aloud, and the different terms written down. The legal maneuvering, the quiet acquisitions of land from men who didn't have the money for lawyers. She had known the shape of it. She had looked at the shape of it and turned away. She sat for a long time with the letter in her hands. Then she put it back in the box and the box back on the shelf. And she turned off the lamp. Through the wall, she could hear very faintly the sound of Wren turning over in her sleep. She sat in the dark and thought about 3 months. 3 months had felt like enough time to decide whether this was a life she could step into, whether this particular quiet valley was the distance she needed, whether a man who said what he meant and a child who asked what she meant, and a foal named argument could add up to something she hadn't had in a very long time. 3 months had felt like enough time. She was no longer certain that she was thinking about it the right way. The morning came the way mornings came in Montana in April without ceremony. The light arriving first over the eastern mountains as a gray suggestion, then a pink one, then the full flat gold of a sky that had made up its mind. Stellan was already at the fence when she came outside. She stood on the porch steps and looked at him working. The mallet rose and fell. The post sank. He did not look up. Wren appeared beside her with a piece of bread in her hand, and her braid already coming loose from the morning's effort. "He gets up before the light," Wren said. "He says the fence won't fix itself." "He's right about that," Cordelia said. "He's right about most things." Wren ate a piece of the bread. "He was right that you'd come back out of the letter. He said probably you would." Cordelia looked at her. "He said that—" Wren nodded. "He said some people write 12 letters and include a train schedule because they've already made up their mind and the letters are just how they explain it to themselves." Cordelia stood on the porch steps and looked at the man at the fence line and the pale mountains behind him and the particular April sky above all of it. She put her hand in her pocket. The small box was upstairs on the shelf. It was heavier than it looked, and it had been heavy for 8 months, and she had been carrying it from room to room in houses that didn't belong to her, and she had not yet decided what to do with it. She went down the porch steps and across the yard toward the fence. Behind her, she heard Wren say to no one in particular, "I knew she would." The weeks that followed had the quality of a season finding its footing. Spring in Montana did not arrive so much as negotiate cold mornings, giving ground slowly to afternoons that carried the first real warmth, then taking it back overnight, then conceding it again in smaller increments, until one day you realized you had stopped thinking about the cold and had started thinking about the mud instead. Stellan had lived this negotiation 36 times. He knew its rhythms the way he knew the fence line and the water table and the particular sound the barn made in a north wind. What he did not know was how to account for the way the rhythms had changed. It was not dramatic. Nothing announced itself. It was more like the way a room looks different when you move a single piece of furniture. Everything technically the same, but the proportions altered the light falling at a new angle on things you thought you knew. Cordelia had taken over the account books without being asked. She had not said she was doing this. One morning he came in from the early chores to find her at the kitchen table, with the ledgers open and a cup of coffee cooling beside her hand. And she looked up without apology and said that she had found 2 additional overcharges from the hardware merchant and had written a letter to the merchant's office in Harlan, and that she expected the credit to be applied within the week. He stood in the doorway with mud on his boots and looked at her for a moment. Then he hung his hat and poured himself coffee and sat down, and she showed him what she'd found. He did not tell her she could keep doing it. He also did not tell her to stop. She continued. Wren began eating breakfast faster. He noticed this on the 4th morning, and then tracked it backward, and realized it had been happening since Cordelia arrived, his daughter, who had previously treated the morning meal as a negotiation between her appetite and her reluctance to begin the day, now finished in half the time and pushed back from the table with purpose. He understood after 2 more days that the purpose was to find Cordelia, before Cordelia found something to do that did not include her. He did not say anything about this either. The writing lesson happened on a Wednesday. Wren announced it the night before with the tone of someone presenting a schedule that had already been finalized. Cordelia had mentioned in passing that she had ridden as a girl, and Wren had taken this information and built an entire curriculum around it without consulting either party beyond the initial announcement. "Pebble is the best one for learning again," Wren said. "Argument is too young and Barnabas is too stubborn, and the other 2 are working horses." "I appreciate the analysis," Cordelia said. "You should wear the brown dress. The gray one's too long." Stellan watched from the fence line. He told himself he was checking the latch on the corral gate, which did need checking and which did not require 20 minutes of checking, but the gate was there. And so was the view of the corral where Wren was instructing Cordelia on the correct way to hold the reins with the absolute authority of a child who has been on horseback since before she could reliably walk. Cordelia listened. She sat on Pebble, who was the most patient animal Stellan had ever owned, a gray mare of indeterminate age, who had the philosophical disposition of something that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. Cordelia sat correctly back, straight heels down, but with the particular tension of a body that remembered a skill from a long time ago and was not yet sure the memory was still good. "Relax your hands," Wren said. "I am relaxed." "Your hands don't look relaxed. They look like you're holding something that might get away." Pebble turned her head and looked at Cordelia with one large brown eye confirming nothing. On the 2nd circuit of the corral, Cordelia's left heel slipped. Nothing dramatic. Pebble didn't startle, just adjusted. But the adjustment was enough to shift Cordelia's weight, and she came off the side with a kind of resigned dignity, landing in the soft dirt of the corral with her arm out, and her expression suggesting that she had anticipated this and found it exactly as inconvenient as expected. Wren was beside her, immediately crouching down with the serious face she wore when she was assessing damage. "Does anything hurt?" "My pride," Cordelia said, "which is not a medical emergency." Wren considered this. "Papa says pride is mostly just the skin you grow over embarrassment. Your father is not wrong about very many things, is he?" "Not about that kind." Cordelia sat up in the dirt of the corral in her brown dress, with her hair coming down on one side, and looked at the pale April sky above the mountains. and then at Wren's solemn face, and then at Pebble, who had drifted back to the center of the corral and was waiting with the patience of the genuinely uninvested. And she laughed. Not the careful, social laugh that Stellan had heard from her at the dinner table, the kind of laugh that is real but also aware of itself. This was the other kind, the kind that starts somewhere lower and gets out before it can be managed. Wren looked briefly startled. Then she laughed too, the helpless giggle of a child who has caught laughter from someone else like a cold. At the fence line, Stellan's hand went still on the gate latch. He had not heard that particular sound, two people laughing that way, without reservation, filling up the corral in 4 years. The last time had been Della and Wren, and a story about a goat that had gotten into the root cellar. He stood very still and let the sound go past him, and did not try to do anything with the feeling it left behind. He went back to the fence. Pruitt returned on a Thursday 3 weeks after his first visit. This time he came on horseback, rather than the company buggy, which meant it was not an official call. He tied up at the post by the barn and waited for Stellan to finish with the cattle before he spoke, which was either courtesy or strategy, and with Pruitt it was usually both. They talked in the yard. The offer was the same. The timeline had shortened. "The note's due 1st of August, Pruitt said. "That's not a threat, Mr. Holt, that's arithmetic. Meridian's prepared to make this straightforward. You've been prepared to make it straightforward for 2 years. 2 years ago, the note had more time on it." Pruitt looked at his hat, turning it in his hands. "There are other families in this valley in the same position. The Dennisons on the North Fork, the Mackays further up. When Meridian acquires adjacent parcels, the consolidation makes everything more," he paused, "resolved. I know what consolidation means." "I thought you might." Pruitt looked up. "Is Mrs. Voss still here?" Stellan went still in a way that was not visible but was present. "Why?" "Just noting that you've had a guest for some weeks." Pruitt settled his hat back on. "The offer stands through July. I'd encourage you to think carefully about your options." He rode out. Stellan stood in the yard after he was gone and thought about the way Pruitt had said Mrs. Voss not as a question, but as something confirmed, as something already known. That evening he found the door to Cordelia's room open and the room empty. She was in the barn. She had taken a lamp, and she was sitting on a hay bale near Pebble's stall, and she had the small box open on her knees. He saw this from the barn door before she heard him, and he saw the letters in her hands, and he saw her face in the lamplight, which was the face of someone who had been somewhere difficult and had not entirely returned. She looked up. He should have said something ordinary, asked if she needed anything offered to bring more lamp oil, anything that would have allowed both of them to step back from whatever the moment was. He did not say anything ordinary. Prairie. He stood in the barn door and looked at the box and the letters in her face. "What are those?" he said. She did not answer immediately. She looked down at the letters, then up at him, and he saw her make a decision. The visible kind, the kind where you can see the person arrive at something, rather than just land on it. "Correspondence," she said, "from people who did business with my husband." "What kind of business?" She closed the box. "The acquiring kind," she said. The same word he had used. or rather the word his father had used that she was using back to him now like a key fitting into something. He came into the barn. He sat on the hay bale across from her elbows on his knees and waited with the patience he had learned from his father and his cattle and 36 Montana winters. She held the box in her hands and looked at it. Aldous built his first company with my family's money, she said. That was the arrangement. My family had the social standing, he had the ambition. He was very good at turning ambition into enterprise. She paused. He was also very good at turning other people's land into his enterprise. There were methods. Legal methods, mostly. Contracts worded one way on paper and explained another way in conversation. Men who needed money and couldn't afford to read the fine print twice. Stellan said nothing. I knew the shape of it, she said. I didn't know the names or the places. I told myself I didn't know enough to object. That was not entirely true. She looked up. I knew enough. I simply chose my comfort over my conscience. Why are you telling me this now? Because Pruitt recognized me today. She set the box on the hay bale beside her. I saw it in his face. He knows who I am, and he's going to come back. And when he does, the conversation is going to be about something other than your fence line. The barn was quiet around them. Pebble moved in her stole. The lamp threw a warm circle that ended in shadow. What does Pruitt know? Stellan said. I'm not certain yet. She looked at her hands. But I know that Voss and Western Railway operated in Montana territory. I know they acquired land along the creek systems because the water rights were the value, not the land itself. And I know that Aldous sold several of those acquisitions to a larger company before the railway folded. She stopped. Stellan watched her face. Before he sold them, she said more carefully, there were complaints from the families who had signed the contracts. Most of them didn't go anywhere legally, but some of them are in the box. She touched the lid of the box with 2 fingers and did not open it. I found them when I was going through his papers after he died, she said. 11 of them. I don't know why he kept them. Perhaps he kept everything. Perhaps he thought they were proof of something. I kept them because... She stopped again. I kept them because they were the most honest record I had of what his work actually cost. She looked at him then. Full on without the composure, she maintained the way most people maintain good posture, not from vanity, but from long habit. There's a letter in here, she said, from a family in Birch Creek. The barn was very quiet. The name on the letter, she said, is Holt. He did not react the way she expected. She had expected anger, or if not anger, the cold version of it, the kind that goes still and hard and stays that way. She had been preparing for that since she found the letter in the box 4 weeks ago, since she arrived at Harlan Junction and saw the valley and understood where she was, since she sat on the porch in the dark and listened to him talk about the 2 kinds of capable. He did not go cold and hard. He stood up from the hay bale and walked to the barn door and stood there looking out at the dark yard. And the line of his shoulders was the line of someone carrying weight. They had been carrying a long time and had just had more added to it. She waited. What year? He said. 1876, April. He was quiet for a long moment. My father signed something in April of 1876. He talked about it until the day he died. He said the man from the company explained the terms in plain language, and the paper said something different. He said he should have read it more carefully. A pause. He blamed himself more than he blamed the company. I thought that was a kind of dignity. Now I think maybe it was just how thoroughly they'd arranged things. She said nothing. He spent the last 10 years of his life paying down a debt that was twice what he'd been told it would be, Stellan said. He paid it. He never lost the land. But the paying of it... He stopped. It took something out of him. Something you don't get back. He turned from the barn door. And then I inherited what was left of both, he said. The land and the note. She sat with the box in her hands and did not try to speak. The note I'm carrying now, he said. The one Meridian is waiting on. Is that? I don't know for certain, she said. Aldous sold several contracts. I don't know which company absorbed which debts, but Meridian operates on the same model, and Pruitt knows who I am. Stellan looked at her for a long moment. Then he went back to the house. She stayed in the barn until the lamp oil ran low, and then she followed. Pruitt came back on a Saturday. This time he came in the afternoon, and he did not wait for Stellan. He knocked at the kitchen door and asked for Mrs. Voss. She received him on the porch. Stellan stood inside the kitchen with the door open and did not pretend to be doing something else. Pruitt did not waste time on approach. You know why I'm here, he said. Tell me anyway, Cordelia said. Voss and Western Railway sold 4 Montana Territory land contracts to Meridian Cattle in 1883. One of those contracts originated from this property, the debt mister. Holt is carrying on the note as a direct descendant of the original Voss contract. I know. Pruitt looked at her steadily. Then you know that as the inheriting party of Aldous Voss's estate, you have a legal interest in how those contracts are resolved. I know that too. There's a mechanism, he said. Mrs. Voss, if you were to contest the original terms of the contract, to bring a claim against Meridian, citing the disparity between the stated verbal terms of the original agreement and the written terms as executed, the note on this property would be suspended pending review, possibly invalidated. She looked at him. That would require me to testify against Meridian. Yes. Which would require me to testify in effect against the practices of my late husband's company. Yes. He held her gaze. I'm aware of what I'm asking. She was quiet. Then, why are you asking it? You work for Meridian. Pruitt looked at his hat for a moment. When he looked back up, something in his face had changed. Not softened exactly, but shifted the way stone shifts when the water that has been working at it for a long time has finally found a way through. I work for Meridian, he said. I have worked for Meridian for 11 years. Before that, I worked for a land company in Nebraska Territory, which operated on the same model as Voss and Western Railway, which acquired the farm my father worked for 16 years. The porch was very still. There were 12 families in our settlement, he said. By 1879, there were 4. I was 17 years old. My father took work on the railroad to pay for the farm he no longer owned. He looked across the valley toward the mountains. I have spent 11 years building a case, he said. collecting documents, recording practices. I have enough to bring a substantial claim against Meridian's methods of acquisition if someone with legal standing chooses to pursue it." He looked back at her. "I don't have legal standing. I have an employment contract and a company horse and a company buggy, and the moment I file anything under my own name, I have none of those things plus a lawsuit." "But I have standing," Cordelia said. "You have standing," he said, "and you have the original contract documents from Voss, which are the foundation the whole case needs. And you are the only person I've found in 4 years of looking who has both." She looked at him for a long time. Behind her, through the open kitchen door, she was aware of Stellan listening. She was aware of the box upstairs on the shelf. She was aware of herself standing on the porch of a house built by a man her husband's company had broken in a valley her husband's company had helped to hollow out. "Let me think," she said. "That's all I'm asking." Pruitt left. She stood on the porch until she heard his horse on the road. And then she went inside, and she did not look at Stellan. And she went upstairs, and she did not come down for supper. She did not think for a day. She thought for 2 weeks. The thinking was not idle. It had texture and weight, and a specific gravity that pressed on her most at night when the house was quiet, and the only sound was the wind moving through the valley and Wren's occasional murmuring from the room down the hall. Cordelia would lie awake and feel the decision waiting for her, like a door she had not yet decided to open. She fixed the flue damper. She reconciled the accounts through the previous year. She taught Wren a card game that Wren immediately began winning. She rode Pebble twice more without falling. She wrote 3 letters she did not send. She took the box from the shelf twice and put it back without opening it. One evening near the end of the 2nd week, she almost told him. They were sitting on the porch after dinner. The kind of quiet evening that had begun to feel less strange and more like a thing she looked forward to when Stellan said, without looking at her, "You're carrying something heavy." She looked at her hands. "Most people are," she said. "Most people don't carry it the way you do," he said, like they're deciding whether to set it down or keep walking. She sat with that for a long moment. She was aware of the box upstairs. She was aware of the way the valley looked in the evening light, gold and substantial and belonging to itself. She thought, I could tell him right now. I could take the box down and open it, and there would be no more deciding. She did not. She told herself she needed more time. She knew the truth was something smaller and more honest than that. She did not want to lose the evening. She did not want to lose the porch and the gold light and the particular quality of his attention when they sat together and the world was quiet. She wanted to stay, and she was afraid the truth would end that before she was ready. So she said, "I'm working through it." And Stellan nodded the way he nodded when he believed something partially and would wait for the rest. And they sat until dark came down over the mountains, and then they went inside. She lay awake that night with the box on the shelf above her head and understood that she had made a choice, not the dramatic kind, not a decision arrived at in crisis, but the small, ordinary kind that people make when comfort wins over conscience. The kind her husband had made over and over for 14 years. She lay with that recognition until it was finished moving through her. Then she slept. And then Pruitt's patience ran out. She was not there when he came. She had ridden out with Wren on a mild Saturday afternoon to look at the coyote den Wren had been tracking in the north pasture, which turned out to be a shallow depression under a rock shelf containing one very relaxed adult coyote and what appeared to be 3 recently arrived pups, all of whom regarded Pebble with philosophical indifference. Wren lay on her stomach in the spring grass and watched them with the total absorption of a child who has been waiting for something and is not going to waste the arrival. Cordelia lay beside her. The afternoon was warm enough to be pleasant, and the grass smelled of wet earth and the coming season, and she was watching the smallest pup attempt something complicated with a stick when she thought I could stay. Not as a question. As a simple statement of fact, the way you state facts when you have finished arguing with them. She lay in the grass and watched a coyote pup fight a stick and thought I could stay. And I have not been honest about why I have been waiting. And the waiting is going to end one way or another. She was still thinking this when they rode back to the yard and found Stellan standing at the fence line, not working, just standing the way he stood when something had happened and he was waiting for the right moment to address it. Wren ran to the barn with the horses. Stellan watched her go. Then he looked at Cordelia. "Pruitt came," he said. Something dropped through her chest. "What did he say?" "He came to tell me that he had spoken to you 2 weeks ago about a legal claim against Meridian, about the original contract, about your standing to bring it." He looked at her evenly. He wanted to know if you'd had enough time to decide. The yard was quiet between them. "He told you," she said. "He assumed I knew. He was surprised when it was clear that I didn't." Stellan's voice was level. It was the leveling that cost something she could hear it. He corrected his assumption and left. She stood in the spring afternoon with the mountains behind her and looked at the man whose father's land her husband had broken. And she thought about 2 weeks of evenings on the porch and the gold light and all the small ordinary choices that added up to the same thing they always added up to. "I was going to tell you," she said. "When?" She didn't answer. He turned from the fence. He walked past her toward the house, not touching her, not looking at her with the particular care of a man who has decided that what he is feeling is not something he is going to let make decisions for him. "Stellan," she said it to his back. He stopped. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for what I know, for how long I waited with it." He stood with his back to her for a long moment. "Come inside," he said. "We'll talk when Wren's asleep." They sat at the kitchen table after midnight, when the house was quiet and the lamp was low. She opened the box. She took out the letter and put it on the table between them. He read it. She watched him read it, watched his eyes track the lines his father had written in the careful hand of a man who respected the act of writing. The letter was 2 pages. He read both pages twice. Then he put it down and looked at it. "He wrote this himself," Stellan said. "He never mentioned it to me. He sent it to Aldous' office. It's dated April 1876, which means he sent it almost immediately after signing. He knew something was wrong from the beginning." Stellan put his hand flat on the letter, not pressing, just resting. "He blamed himself," he said. The same words he'd said in the barn, but this time they had a different weight, because now there was paper under his hand. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and went to the shelf beside the kitchen door, the shelf where the household kept things that didn't belong anywhere else. And he took down a small leather-bound notebook, worn at the spine, the cover dark from years of handling. He set it on the table beside Edric's letter and opened it to a page near the front. His journal, he said. He wrote in it most days. I haven't looked at it in years. He found what he was looking for and read it quietly to himself first. Then he looked at her and read it aloud. September 14th, 1876. Signed an agreement today with a man named Caldwell from the railway company. Edna said not to. I told her I understood what I was signing. I am not certain that was true. The numbers he spoke and the numbers on the paper did not feel like the same numbers when I looked at them later. But I had already put my name to it, and I am not a man who undoes what he has done. I will manage it. I have managed things before, but I think I should have listened more carefully, and I think I should have listened to Edna. Stellan closed the notebook. He knew, he said. He was not saying it to her. He was saying it to the table, to the letter, to whatever remained of his father, in a house that Edric had built with his own hands. He knew he'd made a mistake, and he never said it to me. He just carried it. He should not have had to carry it alone, Cordelia said. The contract was designed to be confusing. That was the point. I know. Stellan set the notebook down beside the letter. But knowing that doesn't change the fact that he spent 10 years blaming himself for something that was done to him deliberately. He looked at her. And now I'm holding a letter he sent to your husband's office, he said. And your husband never answered it. 3 more after that, according to you. 4 letters. And nothing. She held his gaze. I know. I'm not asking you to answer for that, he said. I know you're not. But I am answering for it anyway. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the letter and the notebook, the 2 objects side by side on the kitchen table. His father's complaint and his father's private admission. 47 years of silence between them, and a woman from Boston who had brought one of them here, without knowing what she was carrying. What do you want to do? He said finally. I want to pursue Pruitt's claim, she said. Not because I owe you, because it's right, and because I have spent 14 years not doing things because they were right, and I am tired of the weight of that. He was quiet again. Then, what does it cost you? Nothing I need, she said. Some money, some time, some reputation in Boston which I left in Boston. She held his gaze. What does it cost you? Nothing, he said. If it works, and if it doesn't. He looked at the letter under his hand. Then we're in the same place we're in now, he said, and at least you'll have tried. He stood up from the table. He went to the window and looked out at the dark valley and the dark mountains and the big, unreasonable stars. Talk to Pruitt, he said. Tell him yes. She nodded. He turned from the window. He looked at her sitting at the table with the box open and his father's letter between them. and she could not quite read what was in his face. Not forgiveness, not anger. Something older and more complicated than either. "Cordelia," he said. She waited. "Don't wait again," he said. "Whatever it is, don't wait." He went to bed. She sat at the kitchen table until the lamp guttered, and then she put the letters back in the box, all 11 of them, and sat in the dark a while longer before she carried the box upstairs and set it on the shelf above the bed. She did not put it in the same position it had been in. She put it flat like something that had been set down. The letter went to Pruitt on a Monday morning. Cordelia wrote it at the kitchen table before anyone else was awake in the gray pre-dawn light that came through the east window and made everything in the room look provisional, like a sketch of itself. She wrote it in 2 drafts. The first said too much about her reasons. The second said only what was necessary, which was that she was prepared to proceed, that she would need the documents Pruitt had gathered, and that she wanted a meeting with the territorial attorney in Helena before any formal claim was filed. She folded it and sealed it and left it on the table for the morning post. Then she made coffee and stood at the window and watched the mountains come back out of the dark. Stellan did not mention the letter at breakfast. He did not mention it the day after or the day after that. He was not distant. He answered when spoken to. He worked beside her in the evenings on the accounts without the tightness that had been there before he told Wren the story about the bear and the flour barrel, that he apparently told every spring, which Wren had clearly heard many times and listened to with complete attention regardless. He was present in all the ways he was present. But there was something he was still carrying, and she could see the carrying of it, even if she could not see what was inside. She let it be. She had used up her credit for waiting, and she knew it. Whatever he was working through, he was entitled to work through it at his own pace, and she was not going to mistake his silence for absence. She realized, learning the difference. Pruitt's reply came on a Thursday. It was brief and businesslike and contained a date for the meeting in Helena and a list of documents she would need to bring. It also contained one sentence at the bottom of the page that was not businesslike. "I have been working toward this for 11 years, and I am grateful." She folded the letter and put it in her pocket and went to find Stellan. He was in the south pasture, checking on the new calves, 3 of them born in the past 2 weeks. Small and unsteady in the way of things that have just arrived in the world and are not yet sure what to make of it. He was crouched beside the smallest one, running his hand along its side with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the size of his hands. He looked up when she came through the gate. She told him about the meeting in Helena, the date, the attorney, what Pruitt expected from the process. She told him it would take time, weeks, possibly months, and that the outcome was not guaranteed. Courts moved at their own pace, and the law in the territory was not always concerned with the same questions as the people who lived under it. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he stood from beside the calf and looked across the pasture. "The Dennisons," he said, "and the McKays." Pruitt mentioned them. "He has contracts for both families," she said. "The same origin. If the claim holds for this property, it holds for theirs." He nodded slowly. "My father knew Gus Dennison," he said. "They worked together in the early years before either of them had much. Built each other's fence lines in the season before I was born. He paused. Gus is gone now. His son Everett runs what's left. She waited. Tell Pruitt to include them, Stellan said. If they're willing. Don't do it without asking them first. Of course. He looked at her. The morning light was coming straight across the pasture flat and honest, and he was standing in it without any of the composure she'd learned to read as his version of armor. He just looked like himself. Thank you, he said. 2 words meant completely with nothing added to dress them up. Don't, she said quietly. Don't what? Don't thank me for doing something I should have done before you needed to thank me for it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to the calves. Come look at this one, he said. She's going to be trouble. She came and looked. The small calf regarded her with the dark, untroubled eyes of something that had not yet learned to be suspicious of anything. It took a step toward her on uncertain legs, stopped, swayed slightly, and stayed where it was, which seemed to satisfy it. She did not know what she had expected Montana to be. She had not expected this, the particular quality of a morning in late spring with mud still on the ground and new animals finding their feet, and a man standing beside her who was still working through his anger at her and still showing her the calf, because the calf was worth seeing regardless. She thought, I'm gonna need to earn this, not win it, earn it. The difference mattered. She rode to the Dennison place on a Friday. Stellan offered to come. She said she would go alone. And he nodded once and did not argue, which she was beginning to understand was how he expressed both trust and concern simultaneously in the same gesture. The Dennison property was 4 miles north along the creek road, similar terrain to the Holt Ranch, but with less of it, a smaller house, fewer cattle. A hay barn that listed slightly eastward in the way of structures repaired many times, with whatever was at hand. Everett Dennison was 32, weathered past his age with the deliberate movements of a man who had learned to conserve, because there was never enough of anything to waste. He met her at the gate. He did not invite her in immediately. He stood and looked at her the way men in this territory looked at things that had arrived without being sent for. She told him her name. She told him about her husband. She told him about the contract and the claim, and what Pruitt had assembled, and what she was proposing to do. She told it plainly, without softening the part about her own history with it, and she watched his face while she told it, because she thought she owed him that much to watch the effect of the truth on the person it most affected. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. My father talked about that contract his whole life, he said. He said the man from the company had an honest face. They usually did, she said. That was the method. He looked at the creek road and back at her. If this doesn't work, he said, it stirs everything up and we're in a worse position than we're in now. You understand that? Yes. And you're willing to proceed anyway? I am. A meadowlark was singing somewhere in the grass beyond the fence, the liquid, reckless song of a bird with no concerns about any of this. Talk to Mackay, Everett Dennison said finally. If he's in, I'm in. She talked to Mackay the following Monday. Walter Mackay was 61, old enough to remember the original deal himself. And he said yes before she finished explaining, which was either courage or exhaustion or both. She thought probably both. The Dennison boy came to the Holt place on a Tuesday evening at the end of May. He was not Everett. He was Everett's younger brother, Cole, 16 years old, and agitated in the way of a young person who has been sent to deliver bad news and is not sure how bad. They were all at the dinner table when he knocked. Stellan brought him in and stood him by the door while he caught his breath. "There were men," Cole said, "at our place this afternoon, 2 of them from Meridian, not Pruitt, other men." He said they had told Everett that any legal claim filed against the company's contracts would be contested on the grounds of the territorial statute regarding the limitation period for contract disputes. They said the original agreement had been executed 13 years prior, which placed it outside the window for review. They were polite about it. Politeness was part of the method. Cole finished and looked at Stellan. Stellan looked at Cordelia. She was already thinking about it. The limitation period. She had read enough of Aldis's legal correspondence to know what a limitation period argument looked like and how it was typically deployed and how it was typically countered. The clock on the limitation period runs from discovery, she said, not from execution. If the families didn't know the terms were fraudulent until they attempted to contest. "Can you prove that?" Stellan said. "Pruitt can. That's what his 11 years of documentation is for." She looked at Cole. "Tell your brother not to respond to Meridian directly. Tell him to wait for word from the attorney in Helena." Cole nodded and left at the same speed he'd arrived. The kitchen was quiet. Wren, who had been listening with the particular stillness she used when processing something important, put her fork down. "Are they going to try to stop it?" she said. "They're going to try to complicate it," Cordelia said, "which is different." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that complicating something costs them too, and they have to decide whether we're worth the cost." Wren thought about this seriously. "Are we?" she said. Stellan looked at Cordelia. "Ask me in 6 weeks," Cordelia said. Pruitt was unrattled by the limitation period argument. He had anticipated it. He had documented 3 instances where Meridian's legal team had deployed the same argument against other claimants, and in 2 of those instances had prevailed because there was no one on the other side who knew how to answer it. He came to the ranch on a Wednesday to go through the response documents with Cordelia. He spread them on the kitchen table, and she went through them with the same methodical attention she'd brought to Stellan's account books. Asking questions, marking passages, building the shape of the argument in her mind. The way she had built arguments in other rooms for other purposes, always on behalf of someone else's interests. This time on behalf of her own. Stellan brought coffee and stayed at the far end of the table, not participating but present. And she was aware of him, the way you are aware of weather, not intrusively, just as a constant fact of the environment. At one point, Pruitt looked up from a document and said to no one in particular, "Your husband was thorough, I'll say that for him. He kept everything." "He did," Cordelia said, "including things that were evidence against him." "Including those." Pruitt looked at the document. "Strange thing for a man like that to do." "I've thought about it," she said. "I think he kept everything because keeping everything was part of how he understood his own importance. The records proved he had done things. The fact that some of those things were harmful was secondary. The existence of the record was what mattered to him." Pruitt considered this. "Pride," he said. "A certain kind of it." He looked at Stellan. "Men who build are rarely remembered as well as men who acquire. but they sleep better." Stellan looked at him steadily. "My father said something close to that." "Sounds like a man worth knowing," Pruitt said. The claim was filed in Helena on the 14th of June. Cordelia was in the attorney's office for 3 hours. She signed her name on 11 documents. She answered questions from the territorial attorney, a precise and tired-looking man named Garvey, who had developed a professional immunity to being surprised by things done improperly in the name of commerce. He was not immune to being interested. He read the Voss contracts carefully, and then read them again, and then said without looking up, "These are the clearest examples of deliberate term misrepresentation I have seen in 12 years of territorial practice." "Yes," Cordelia said. "You understand that your husband's estate may be named in the counter-argument?" "Yes." "And you understand that your cooperation in this proceeding will be a matter of public record?" "Yes." He looked up and held her gaze for a moment, not unkindly, but directly the way a man looks at someone he is trying to accurately assess. "All right," he said, and went back to the documents. She came back to Birch Creek on a Friday evening, the light long and gold across the valley, the kind of light that makes everything look like it has been chosen. Stellan was at the fence. He was always at the fence. She drove the hired buggy up to the house, and he came across the yard and helped her down the first time he had offered his hand that way. And she took it and stepped into the yard in the long light. "Filed," she said. "Garvey expects a response from Meridian within 30 days. Pruitt thinks they'll negotiate rather than litigate. And if they don't, then we litigate." She looked at him. "I've written worse things than a deposition." He nodded. He did not immediately let go of her hand, not holding it just the slight continuation of the contact, the duration of a breath. She noticed and did not address it. Then Wren came out of the house, and the moment resolved itself in the ordinary way that moments do. The response from Meridian came on a hot July afternoon 3 weeks later. Not a legal filing. A letter from the company's Eastern legal office addressed to Garvey and Helena. Copied to Cordelia and to the law office Pruitt had found to represent the Dennison and Mackay interests. She read it at the kitchen table. Stellan stood at the window. Wren had been sent outside with the dignified resentment of a child who knows she is being managed. The letter was long and legal, and at its conclusion, not what Meridian had intended to write. Meridian was prepared to discuss resolution. She set the letter down. "They want to negotiate," she said. Stellan turned from the window. She looked at him across the kitchen, across the table where they had sat, past midnight with Edric's letter between them. "It means Pruitt was right," she said. "The documentation was enough." He came to the table and read the letter. She watched his eyes move across the page, the same stillness he brought to everything that mattered. He set it down. "My father sent a letter in 1876, he said. He never got an answer. Kept sending them. 3 more over 2 years, all to the Voss office in Boston." He looked at the table. No answer. She said nothing. "He kept sending them," Stellan said, again quieter. "That's the thing. He kept believing someone would respond." "I know," she said. "And I know that what we're holding right now is not justice in the way your father deserved it. It's partial. It's late. It's the best that's available. She held his gaze. I need to know if that's enough. Not for you to forgive what happened, but enough for you to believe it was worth doing. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, they could hear Wren in the yard talking to argument over the corral fence, in the instructional tone she used with animals and adults she was trying to educate. My father used to say that good work done late is still good work, Stellan said slowly, that the lateness doesn't cancel the work. He said it about fencing mostly. Posts that needed driving in the fall and got driven in the spring instead. He paused. I think it applies. She breathed. Then let's right back to Garvey, she said. The negotiation took 6 weeks. It was not simple. There were arguments about the limitation period which Pruitt's documentation settled in their favor. There were arguments about the scope of the claim which Garvey handled with the tired competence of a man who had been waiting for a case like this one. There were 3 separate offers from Meridian, each better than the last, which was its own kind of admission. In the end, the Holt note was canceled. The Dennison note was reduced by 2/3 and restructured on terms a man could actually meet. The Mackay situation was resolved outright. Walter Mackay received the letter from Meridian's legal office, read it on his porch, folded it into his shirt pocket, and did not speak about it for 2 days, which his wife said was how she knew it was real. Pruitt lost his position with Meridian at the conclusion of the negotiation. He had expected this. A job offer from Garvey's office was waiting, extended in a brief letter that Pruitt described as the shortest professional correspondence he had ever received, and the one he intended to frame. On a Tuesday evening at the end of that same week, Everett Dennison rode down from the North Fork. He came alone, tied his horse at the post by the barn, and stood in the yard until Stellan came out of the house. Cordelia was at the kitchen window, and she saw the 2 men talking, saw the way Everett held his hat, turning it in his hands, the way men hold hats when they are working up to something. She went to the porch. Everett saw her and stopped turning his hat. Mrs. Voss, he said. Mr. Dennison. He looked at her for a long moment. Stellan stood beside him, not speaking, letting the moment be what it needed to be. I want you to know, Everett said, that I had you wrong when you first came to my gate. I thought you were another person from the East who wanted something from us. I told my brother that after you left. He paused. Cole told me I was wrong. He said a person who tells the truth about their own family doesn't do it because they want something. They do it because they've decided to stop lying. Cordelia stood on the porch steps and listened. My father talked about that contract until the day he died, Everett said. He said it took more than money. Said it took something out of him that he could never name. He settled the hat back on his head. I don't know what you get out of this, but what you did, it mattered. I wanted to say it directly. He looked at Stellan, who nodded once. Then Everett went back to his horse and rode up the creek road toward the North Fork, his silhouette getting smaller against the evening sky until the road curved and he was gone. Stellan came and stood at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at her. She said, He came all the way down here to say that. Yes, Stellan said. He did. She stood with that for a moment, the weight of it, the specific gravity of a thing that could not be bought or arranged, that had to be earned and received and held carefully. Then Stellan said, Cole was right, you know. About why you told the truth. She looked at him. You told it when it would have been easier not to, he said. That's not nothing. It came out anyway, she said. Pruitt made sure of that. You told me the part Pruitt didn't, he said. The part about the 2 weeks. You didn't have to tell me that. She had no answer for that. She stood on the porch steps in the evening light and had no answer. He went back inside. She stayed on the porch a while longer, watching the creek road where Everett had gone, thinking about men who rode 4 miles to say a thing directly that they could have left unsaid. The evening the final document arrived, Cordelia carried it out to the fence line. She did not call for Stellan. She walked across the yard in the August evening, the light beginning its long descent over the western mountains, and found him where she always found him when there was work to be done and the work had not yet been finished. He saw her coming. He set down the mallet. She handed him the document without speaking. He read it. When he looked up, the sky above the mountains was the particular dark blue that comes at the end of a hot day, the blue that signals the arrival of night without apologizing for it. It's done, she said. He held the document in both hands. She had thought she would feel more certain about what to say. She had thought that after all the months and the letters and the nights at the kitchen table and the long drive to Helena and back, she would arrive at this moment with the right words assembled. She did not have the right words. She had only the true ones. I want to stay, she said. Not for 3 months. I want to stay because this is the first place in a long time where I have done something real, and I am not willing to leave it. He looked at her. The evening light was the color of old brass, the color of things handled long enough to develop a particular warmth. I know you're not finished being angry with me, she said. Not for what's in the box for the waiting. I know the difference, and I know I gave you reason to doubt whether I would tell the truth when it cost me something. She held his gaze. I won't do that again. I don't need you to believe that today. I'm telling you so you know where I'm starting from. He stood with the document in his hands and looked at her in the August evening. Then he put the document under his arm and reached into his shirt pocket and took something out and held it toward her. It was a coin. Old worn, smooth copper gone the color of dark honey from years of handling. On one face barely legible from the wearing a year 1871. On the other 2 letters, E. H. Edric Holt. 1871. The year he had first come to this valley. Wren found it last week, he said, in Barnabas's old saddlebag, the one I'd been meaning to repair since my father died and kept putting off. Must have worked its way into the lining years ago. He turned it once in his fingers. I've been carrying it since she found it, trying to decide what to do with it. She looked at the coin, then at him. My father carried it every day he was on this land, Stellan said. He said a man keeps something in his pocket when he means to stay somewhere. He held it out to her. I want you to have it. She did not immediately take it. That's his, she said. It is. And the land is his, and the fence posts are his, and the debt that's just been settled was his, and most of what I know about how to work and what to stand for came from him. He held her gaze. He also used to say that things are meant to be used, that a thing you put away and never touch is already a kind of loss. She took the coin from his hand. It was smaller than she expected. warmer than she expected from being in his pocket. She held it and looked at the worn face of it, the letters that had almost disappeared into the metal from years of handling. She put it in her pocket. Wren found them at the fence line when she came out of the house. She looked at her father and then at Cordelia, and then at the document under her father's arm, and arrived at whatever calculation 8-year-olds arrive at when the information available to them is incomplete but sufficient. "Is it finished?" she said. "The main part," Stellan said. "What's the next part?" He looked at Cordelia. "We'll see," Cordelia said. Wren considered this with the patience she reserved for adult answers that were less complete than they appeared. "When I wrote the first letter to Denver," she said, "I told the newspaper the advertisement was for a companion, not a wife. Because Papa said we didn't need anything except to get through the winter, and I thought that was probably wrong, but I wasn't sure how wrong." "You were right to be uncertain," Cordelia said. "I know, but I also knew that a person who answers an advertisement for a companion and comes 3,000 miles to a place they've never seen that person is looking for something more than companionship." Cordelia looked at the girl. "What were you looking for?" Wren said. The question was direct and patient, and entirely without guile, and it deserved a direct and patient answer. "I was looking for something I'd done that mattered," Cordelia said. "Something that I hadn't walked away from." Wren turned this over. "Did you find it?" The mountains to the west were going dark at their bases and bright at their peaks, the snow catching the last of the light and holding it. The valley below was the color of late summer grass, dry and gold. And somewhere down the creek road, the coyotes were starting their evening conversation, carrying across the quiet, with the easy confidence of things that had been here long before anyone had thought to fence the land or note it or argue in courts about who it belonged to. Cordelia put her hand in her pocket and felt the coin. "I think I'm in the process of finding it," she said. Wren nodded. This seemed to satisfy her in the way that honest answers satisfied her, which was more thoroughly than comfortable ones. She turned and went back to the house. The screen door closed behind her, and the sound settled into the evening, and the evening absorbed it, and went on being the evening, the coyotes calling the mountains, holding their last light. The fence line running straight across the pasture in both directions for as far as you could see. Stellan picked up the mallet. "There are 2 more posts on the south run," he said. "It's nearly dark." "I know." He looked at the gap in the fence line. "But I'll see them in the morning, and I'd rather have them done." She looked at the fence. The posts already set the gap where 2 were missing. She thought about a man who had spent his life setting posts that other people would lean against, build from use to hold in the things that mattered. She thought about all the work that goes into a thing before it is ready to hold anything. "You'll need someone to hold the post," she said. He looked at her. "The ground's too hard to drive it straight without someone steadying it," she said. "I've watched you do it. You need 2 people." He handed her the post. She took it and set it in the gap in the fence line and held it vertical with both hands. He lifted the mallet. The first strike rang out across the pasture clean and final. The second drove the post true. The third set it. She let go. The post held. She stepped back and put her hands in her pockets. Both of them the right one, finding the coin without her looking for it. and she looked at the fence. The gap was closed,